because communities feel that government is trying to do whatever they possibly can with limited resources. I'll say for Boston, for example, and other cities, we have the same number of poor. We have the same number of people who feel betrayed by national government, but yet at the same time they felt that at least somebody is on their side, and that's the key issue, trying to help them, trying to work with them. And that's the difference here. We have got to be able to convince the people of America's cities that government is on their side. We're not asking the federal government to bail out the cities, but just to be on our side, just to help us.
Along those lines, you've been quoted as saying that it is incomprehensible how both Democrats and Republicans have shown callous indifference to the cities. Do you really think it's incomprehensible politically? Don't you think that the Democratic Party has made a decision in this election year that it does not want to focus on urban problems, that it does not want to seem to be the party of minorities and the poor?
I think both of the parties are out of touch with what's going on in American cities, and I think that's what has to be illustrated here. There are positive things that are happening in American cities, but in Washington, if we're waiting for Washington to come up with the solutions to the problems, they won't do it. That's why it's up to the American people. The American people have to take an active part in what is going on. That's why I think what we need in this country, among other things, is a national commission on urban neglect to focus
that was the next thing I was going to ask you, Mr. Mayor, very quickly. Yeah. We've had a national commission after every single solitary one of these things, and here we are again. What good is a national commission going to do?
Well, what's happening here, or what has happened in the past, is there's been people have ignored, Washington has ignored the problems of America's cities. And again, I think that what is happening here is there's been very little attention given to what's happening in communities all across this country. And let's put some attention on why do these riots take place? Why is there such fear and apprehension and anger and frustration in communities all across this country? Because people have nothing to lose. Government has stripped them of their dignity and their respect. And that's why they don't respect government anymore. That's why people aren't voting. That's why people don't have respect for our national leaders, because our national leaders don't respect the people and the needy people of our cities. That's why.
Mayor Flynn, thank you very much from Boston for coming this morning and giving us your views. We'll have you back. Coming next, Kansas City Mayor Emmanuel Cleaver, and shortly, HUD Secretary Jack Kemp.
Risk. As hard as it is to live with, it's impossible to live without. At Merrill Lynch, we know that risk can be dealt with. It can be managed. It can even be turned to your advantage. To do that, you need a partner. A partner who understands it and can help you turn a world of risk into a world of opportunity. Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
Imagine your refrigerator with bigger door shelves, for bigger bottles, with leftovers left in quick-serve trays for leftover space, more space, nearly 27 cubic feet, and a door in the door for things you use more. Imagine GE's Space Center 27.
This Week with David Brinkley will continue in a moment. Say good morning to the birthplace of the American spirit. Come on board the Great New England Bus Tour, all this week on Good Morning America.
From Sharp Technology comes the professional high-speed, high-volume copying system that meets the needs of today's office.
Sharp Technology from Imaging Technologies.
The Sharp SF9800 is the copier of choice for today's busy offices. Named Copier of the Year by Buyers Laboratory. With its advanced functions, the SF9800 offers a high level of productivity and versatility. Call today for a demonstration of the Sharp SF9800.
At Imaging Technologies, we mean business.
Iowa's largest mattress retailer has just opened a factory outlet store in the Westport Home Center in Des Moines. At Levitt Mattress, we handcraft the finest quality luxury mattress and box springs available anywhere. Since 1946, time-honored Iowa craftsmen have combined state-of-the-art technology with age-old manufacturing methods. During our 46th anniversary promotion, we've reduced prices on selected mattresses. Remember, when you compare specifications, you will always save 30% off furniture store sale prices.
Get inside Iowa Auto Racing today at 5.
Mayor Cleaver, welcome.
Good to be here.
Good to see you here. Now, is this a racial thing? Are we dealing with a racial problem, or are we dealing with some other sort of problem when we talk about the plight of the cities?
Well, unfortunately, we have relegated the discussion to center on some simplistic answers and simplistic proposals to correct the problems. I think it is a mixture of race, and it is also a mixture of a frightening underclass that we have not dealt with over the last 2 decades. I think it would be wrong to just say it was racial. All one would need to do would be to examine the footage from Los Angeles. The riot was multiracial.
All right. Is it a money problem? If we just put enough money in there, will that do it?
Well, we certainly need to put more money in than we put in. In the 1970s, the poverty level was 11%. The poverty rate was 11%. Today, it's 15%. And so we're going backwards. We need more money. The cities are not going to survive during this last decade of the century unless we're able to address some growing problems related to education, related to police, related to the infrastructure, related to the revival of the central city.
How are you going to get the white suburbs to vote more taxes to pay for money for the inner city?
Well, first of all, we need a president and Washington leadership who is willing to go to the laboratory to come up with an antidote for the compassion fatigue that in part they created. It is now popular to be opposed to programs to aid the poor. And I think we've got to reverse that. And I'm hoping that we will not do any greater damage during this upcoming presidential election. I think we need a president who is more interested in being right and just than being president.
Let's continue on the subject of the compassion fatigue, as you call it, in the underclass. What a lot of Americans of goodwill say is it is a fact, never mind the causation involved, it is a fact that the expansion of domestic spending targeted toward the inner cities under Lyndon Johnson and later under Richard Nixon, when it really went up as fast, if not faster, coincided with the expansion of the intractable underclass to which you refer. These people of goodwill say, it didn't work in whatever it was. Now, tell me why they're wrong.
Well, they're wrong because I'm a product of the federal spending. There are minorities all over this country who are now in the middle class because of the federal spending. It was those federal programs that allowed minorities their first opportunity in history to move into the area of management, to develop skills in management, to develop skills in communication. I think that the problem is that the black middle class was created during the days of the federal programs, and the reason that the middle class is no longer growing is because the federal funds are not coming in to bring more people up into the growing middle class.
But is it simply a question of government money? I've noticed, for instance, in some of the meetings that have been taking place in the last week in Mayor Flynn's city of Boston and Roxbury, that leaders came in and said 10 demandments, and then the people in the community moved number 10 to number 1, which was self-help. Isn't there a growing attitude that that's where the problem really needs to be solved?
Well, there is a need for self-help, and I think the minorities need to understand, at least those of us in positions of leadership, we need to understand that we need to deal with some problems internally. I think self-help is something that we're going to hear more about over the next 8 years. But I also believe that self-help is not the cure-all. We need help from Washington. I'm trying to run a city right now that's lost $20 million in federal fund, revenue sharing. We don't have community development block grants at the level that we once did. We don't have the UDAG program to revitalize the core any longer. I have 42% of the poor in my city limits, as does Mayor Flynn. 42% of the nation's poor live in the core cities. We need help. I mean, we can't deal with all of the mammoth problems without some federal help.
Some people say, let's cut through all this tapestry of programs we have and have two categorical duties. It shall be a categorical duty of the federal government to provide everyone a job, and a categorical duty of everyone to take a job offered by the federal government. Would you be in favor of that?
Well, I think that that sounds certainly worth exploring. I think jobs in America are the key to a stable environment, and I think we ought to explore any number of proposals that could, in fact, create jobs for the Central City.
There was a time in the 60s and 70s when integration, per se, was a goal. It was a goal of many of the federal programs. It was a goal of many of the things advocated for changing society in this country. Do you think integration still is worthwhile as a goal?
Well, you know, my heart would have broken into 1,000 different pieces when I saw the rioting in Los Angeles, if I had not believed and still believe that racial harmony is in fact possible. It is desirable and it is possible.
But can you have racial harmony with separate but equal divisions in society and blocks, and where people live and where people go to school and where people work?
We cannot. And that's where I think the leadership comes in, whether it's the mayor and certainly the president and the members of the cabinet. I mean, race baiting is the meanest species of politics, and I think we've had that. We've got to make race an issue today in order that it will not be an issue tomorrow, and the leadership on the race question must come from the highest levels of government. And I think that right now there is no emphasis on integration. The racial isolation exists because we have not made it a significant piece of the discussion.
Reverend Cleaver, the mayor of Kansas City, thanks very much for being with us. Coming next, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Jack Kemp.
Now, yesterday we were talking about food. Today we're going to talk about where it comes from. Does anybody know? Jill?
It comes from the grocery store.
Well, yes, but before that, anybody else? Andy?
Food comes from the farmers who grow it, and all the other people who help turn it into the food that we eat every day.
American agriculture is something we can all be proud of. It's not only America's biggest industry, it's the most productive system of its kind in history.
That's very good. How do you know so much about food?
Well, my dad's a great teacher. Hey, Tammy! Hey, Dad!
Considering how abundant food is in this country, it's easy to see why some people take it for granted. Fortunately, a lot of other people don't. ADM, supermarket to the world.
Sexual harassment on the job. It can happen to anyone. It can happen to you.
You want to do it before we go back to the office?
There's got to be a way to get the man to stop.
Nobody in that building's going to support you.
Where has he touched you the other times?
Stephanie Zimbalist, Sexual Advances, Sunday.
Secretary Kemp, it's always good to see you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you for being here. You were in L.A., so you saw firsthand what happened out there. And I want to ask you whether you agree with Marlin Fitzwater, the president's press secretary, that the problems of L.A. had their origin in the Great Society programs of the 60s.
Well, two quick things, then let's stop placing the blame on either Clinton for saying on Saturday to the Democratic Leadership Council that it was Ronald Reagan and George Bush and the Republican Party that caused the riot, or Marlin Fitzwater, who said on Monday that the Great Society caused it.
The previous Monday.
No, previous Saturday.
Yes, but he came first. Let me just keep the record straight.
Look, I knew that we would start on a
well, the record's a record, Mr. Secretary.
You need to know that what Marlin was attempting to say, in my view, was that simply empowering bureaucracies, and as George Will pointed out, to having trickle-down government did not cure the underlying problems that helped cause the conditions. And
that's not what he said, Mr. Secretary.
Well, let me share with you. Paul Taylor in the Washington Post yesterday did an outstanding story which suggested, took 3 inner-city people, all from Nickerson Gardens, which is a public housing community in Watts. I grew up in L.A. I know Watts well. I used to drive my daddy's trucks down Central Avenue, and I was fascinated to find out that, and I won't take very long, Sam, but One woman, 38 years old, said, welfare is but a crutch. You're never able in your life to say, I did something on my own. Another woman said, the trouble with welfare is that it punishes you for trying. And finally, Vincent Woods, the resident manager at Nickerson Garden, said, welfare doesn't let the father into the picture. If he gets a job and wants to move in with his wife or the mother of his children, she loses her apartment.
All right.
So now, the point I'm making is, look, the welfare system has shattered the link between human effort and the reward for effort.
I understand your
and
view.
We've got to reform it and spend less time on just the safety net.
About to turn you over to Mr. Will, and if you just give a short answer, yes or no. Do you agree that it was the Great Society programs of the 60s that caused the riot?
The Great Society did not cause the riot. It was solely predicated on building a net under which people should not be allowed to fall. It didn't spend any time trying to build a ladder upon which people can climb out of poverty, and that's what the president wants to do, build a ladder of opportunity.
We don't want to have too retrospective a cast of mind, but we are arguing about where to go, and we want to know where we've been. Are there any of the great welfare programs, principally Great Society programs, that you think ought to be repealed? Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, Job Corps, 68 Housing Act, good programs. Okay.
By and large, everything can be reformed and made better.
Now, the basic welfare payment, the AFDC, that is said to have in some way made the black inner-city male redundant and weakened family commitment and all the rest, that's a 1935 program.
Right.
What went wrong? I mean, it didn't happen in 1935. We're trying to put our finger on the moral as well as the material causes of what's gone wrong in our cities. What is your belief? Is there a moral dimension to this, and how did it get there?
Well, certainly values are at the heart of all solutions to problems. The family is the best teacher of values. Government doesn't create wealth. People who work and save and invest create wealth. And with all due respect to my good friend Ray Flynn, the government is spending and has spent close to $3 trillion, and my point would be that it has simply empowered mayors through UDAG grants and bureaucracies, public housing authorities, and others in social welfare delivery systems, instead of directly helping people get choice, get more power, get assets. A very distinguished liberal, card-carrying Democrat professor at Washington University in St. Louis, Michael Sheridan, has just authored a new book called Assets and the Poor, and his point is, I think, a good one for conservatives and liberals to come together on, which is this: our welfare system needs to be converted from simply encouraging people towards consumption, towards savings, towards accumulation of property, towards entrepreneurship and ownership of a home, a job, a good education, an educational choice. And that is the predicate around which the president announced some rather radical, in my view, and progressive ideas of reforming the inner city education, inner city job climate, inner city housing.
Radical ideas that you proposed several years ago, and you have been beating at the door of the White House with those ideas for 3 years, and you have gotten back memoranda that we have read saying these are not our issues. This is not where the Republican Party should be going, talking about urban issues. Is that, first of all, is it a Republican issue, and is it changed?
Now, like Emmanuel Cleaver of Kansas City said, look, this is America's problem. There's a moral obligation. The Good Shepherd reminds us that we have an obligation to not only save the 99, but to seek to save the stray lamb as well. And I am convinced that if we take steps, albeit too late in some cases, if we take steps on a bipartisan basis, which I believe next week the president is going to ask the leadership of the Congress on a bipartisan base to move in a emergency way in several areas: educational reform, the weed and seed program, enterprise zones that would eliminate the capital gain tax on any man or woman who works, saves, and invests in their city.
Let's talk about enterprise zones. The Congress passed enterprise zones in the tax bill that the president just vetoed. He just vetoed enterprise zones, and when he did that, he did not call it separately. He didn't say, I like this section of the bill, why don't you pass it separately?
Well, he has asked, with all due respect, it's fair to have this debate, but the President of the United States has been asking for enterprise zones in every state of the Union for 3 years. A. B. Dan Rostenkowski, who's a good friend of the President's as well as mine, and Charlie Rangel, who's a co-sponsor of the President's enterprise zone bill, both know that were it to pass separately, the President would sign it and take Rangel and Rosti to L.A. and Chicago and East Harlem to cut the ribbon. I mean, this the problem with the Rostenkowski bill was that it was passed with a tax increase, and it's counterintuitive as well as counterproductive to raise taxes and cut them at the same time.
So when he comes this week and does this proposal, is it going to have some dollar signs attached to it? What will they be?
It's going to take money.
And how much money?
But it's not. I don't want to put a dollar figure on it because I think that should be up to the president. But in my view, it's not how much money you spend as much as how you spend it. Do you give people a chance in public housing to begin to manage and control and ultimately own their housing, or do you leave them perpetually dependent upon welfare?
Well, I'd like to get in on this too, because Cokie, I was going to go down the same road. Both mayors have told us that they need more money. They pointed out that the Nixon administration programs have been cut. They were doing better under Richard Nixon than under Reagan and Bush. Now, you know it's going to need more money, I take it, and my question to you is, where do you get it? If you're so against raising taxes, where do you get the money?
Well, raising taxes is just counterproductive to getting out of a recession.
Don't raise taxes. Tell me you can get it from a stone. I mean, where do you get the money?
Well, in one case, you don't even need to put more federal dollars or redistribute the wealth. What you need to do is to, now,
well, the guy living in Omaha, Mr. Secretary, doesn't care whether he's taxed locally or he's taxed nationally. It comes out of his pocket.
Let me make a point. Just give me a chance to make one point, and then ask me about it if you want. We shouldn't, in my view, just massively redirect federal spending. That won't work. We've spent $3 trillion. Right now, this year, we're spending close to $800 billion. What the mayor objects to, Mayor Flynn of Boston, is that we have taken money out of construction of public housing that takes 6 years from the time it's authorized to getting a family into that public housing, and we've given people vouchers, and the funding for that type of a program has gone from $6 billion in 1980 to $17 billion today. Now, the question that Mayor Flynn wants to be the mayor who gets to announce a new public housing project in his district, it won't work.
That's a cynical view. That is really a cynical view of politics.
It is not cynical.
I mean,
it is not cynical.
You're saying the mayor of Boston's motive is to announce a new project?
Look,
that's what you said.
The mayor is a friend of mine, but I have to answer the fact that he blamed Republicans for the riot. That's a little bit harsh and is far from the fact. When we're spending $800 billion this year on social welfare, helping people, direct aid to the people, however, not to the bureaucracy.
But Mr. Secretary, there has been a problem with the voucher program because of the availability of housing, and it's hard to take a voucher when there's no place to take it to.
Well,
and that's a lot of what the complaint is.
In some cases, that's true, and we think that where people have an unavailability of housing, two things should happen. One, we should take a look at exclusivity of zoning and building codes and the impact fees and the terrible distortions in the 1986 tax law that drove low-income providers of housing out of the tax incentive system. A. B. The housing has become the most over-regulated industry in the United States of America. And thirdly, our programs would allow cities to choose between vouchers and rehabbing of housing or construction as a last resort. But I'm just suggesting to you and Sam, it takes an awful long time to get people into public housing.
Back to the question that I asked you first, though, which is this question about, because it does hit on where we go from here. Does the Republican Party now think this is their issue, these are their voters, or does the Republican Party think that the way to go from here is to emphasize the lawlessness in the riots and law and order as an issue?
Well, the one thing I learned in Los Angeles is just about everybody has a grain of truth to their arguments. Lawless and anarchy and pillaging and plundering and looting and killing people and violating property rights is not the solution to anything, and the president was right to dispatch early assistance to L.A. and California to put down the war on life and property. But now I think we need a bipartisan, conservative-based anti-poverty program designed to empower people, designed to put jobs and educational choice and homeownership. But do you have people on your team? You've thought that a long time. I think it has to be bipartisan.
People on your team?
It has to be bipartisan.
But perhaps, Mr. Secretary, you're trying to save something that can't and need not be saved, and that is the classic American city. Orange County, Fairfax, Virginia, there are lots of so-called edge cities that are prospering, booming like mad. Maybe the central city as we know it, a sort of location of manufacturing jobs, is obsolete and can't be resuscitated.
I disagree, George. I disagree. We have to put compensatory policies in place to drive jobs, educational choice, and ownership of property. People do not pillage that which they own. People improve that which they own. It builds respect not only for your own life and your own property, but your neighbor's property. There was no rioting in Los Angeles in areas where people were owners.
You're a great respecter of market forces. And in a sense, the market has spoken about inner cities.
No, I disagree. It's been distorted. It's been distorted. We have denied credit and capital to the inner city of America through redlining. The president wants to greenline the inner city. He wants to flood the inner city with credit and capital. And I am convinced.
But that's government overpowering the market.
Well, it's government making, no, it isn't, George. It's making up for the market, where the market has been distorted by the government. Now the government needs to take steps to remove the barriers that would encourage entrepreneurship and ownership in the center city, particularly among minorities.
I'm going to have to let you go, but before I do, we noticed you sitting by the left side of the president the other day. How does it feel to come in from out of the cold, and do you think once the crisis is over, they'll relegate you back to the other end of the table?
Well, they may, but I'm not worried about that. I think the president took some steps on Friday, and he wants to take bipartisan steps next week, and I'm convinced that this is the moment to get Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and liberals and find a third way, and we can do it if we put our minds to it.
Thank you very much, Secretary Kemp. Always good to see you.
Always good to see you, Sam.
Well, coming next, our discussion here in the studio, and joining us will be Julie Johnson, Time Magazine's White House correspondent. In a moment.
The biggest oven I've ever seen.
Introducing a GE gas oven with sealed burners and 30% more oven space, all in the same kitchen space. The new XL44 from GE.
You've made too much food. Ariel, you're a pain in the...
It's the big oven everyone's talking about.
Microsoft Word for Windows is so easy, it just takes one click to make your work look twice as good. Microsoft Word, the word processor for Windows.
The business climate is so competitive today. Either you give your customer the best possible service, or somebody else will.
We could take you on a vacation you will never forget, but you've got to get through to us first.
AT&T 800 service connects more calls on the first try. And it connects them faster, so more of your customers actually get through.
To us, a single 800 call could be worth thousands of dollars. And if the call doesn't get through, the opportunity is lost.
With the AT&T 800 assurance policy, if something happens and the customers can't get through, we'll reroute those calls to any working phone in 30 minutes. Guaranteed.
We chose AT&T because our 800 service is our front door, and we want it open to anyone, anywhere who's thinking about a vacation.
When you consider that every call is a customer, why would you want anything less than the most reliable 800 service?
If you want to win in the 21st century, you have to play the service game and play it really well.
We can make a difference. AT&T. Call us.
Dan figures the time he saves using Microsoft Excel for his budget is time well spent with others. Microsoft Excel, the spreadsheet for Windows.
On the American agenda, teaching in the inner city. It is as difficult as teaching can be.
The police tell me I have at least 15 gangs represented among the student body here.
How to find the kind of teacher who can survive. And has the experiment called Biosphere gone wrong? Rumors of fraud abound. On ABC's World News Tonight, this week.
Julie Johnson, welcome to our roundtable.
Thanks.
Years ago, you and I both covered the White House, but you've moved on, haven't you?
That's right. I covered the Supreme Court.
Ah, well, onward and upward.
You've moved on too, Sam.
Yes, indeed. Let me just say that I want to continue this discussion of what happened in L.A. from the standpoint of the president went there and Bill Clinton went there. Ross Perot didn't go there, but said that he would have gone there first had he been president. From that, do you see a new commitment, George, or is this political posture?
It's the obligatory choreography of politics that we swoop in and swoop out and have the particular pictures taken. I think a lot of Americans know. They don't sort of know what the historians say, but they get the picture. Historians say steam power concentrated cities and made them manufacturing centers. Electricity and computers and all the rest disperses economic life. The very rationale for an inner city, for the revitalization. We're trying to put back together a 1930s or an 1890 city, and I think Americans are very skeptical that any amount of money can overcome the changes in the world that have made the inner cities superfluous.
But you're talking about a rationale, as I take it, based on the steam engine. The rationale today in a lot of people's minds, whether they voice it or not, is to keep them, and they know who them is, in a contained place.
You heard Jack Kemp say, when asked by Cokie, what's the percentage in this, the political percentage, and Jack gave the only possible answer, which is there's a moral obligation to do it. That there may be, but I don't believe there's a political obligation.
Which is why both parties, both Bill Clinton and George Bush, seem to be all over the lot on it, if the truth be told. The president can't make up his mind whether he wants to say, we've got to be compassionate, we have to start a conversation about race, or whether he wants to say, we've got to be concerned about law and order, and he's gone back and forth. And the same thing, Governor Clinton has gone out there and he's talked about his own experiences growing up in the South, and that he has an understanding about race that George Bush doesn't have, but he has also not wanted to get too closely identified with the whole politics of minorities and poverty. And I think that this is something where both parties are walking a line.
What about it, Julie? I mean, is this for real, or is this just all talk on the part of people wanting to get elected?
I have to think that it's all talk, but what's so troubling to me is that these people seem so far removed from the individuals in South Central LA and in Crenshaw and in these neighborhoods where they would otherwise never be in. And even with the president going in and looking at, clearly, coming out of it shell-shocked, looking at the devastation, it leaves you wondering, though, whether he chooses to side either on the law and order side or either on the empowerment, Jack Kemp, I'm going to reconsider those ideas side, what he's really going to do. Where's going to be the follow-up? What's going to be the follow-through? And even just his first response was to look to old ideas. He gathered in old civil rights leaders, some of whom's voices were the same voices we heard after Newark and Watts and other cities burned. I mean, we need to go on and look forward, and then that gets right back to whether he has a vision thing or not.
Apparently went to his domestic policy advisor and said, go around to the cabinet department and look for ideas. Well, that's not where we are. I mean, the ideas have been out there. Jack Kemp has been putting them out there for 3 years, his ideas.
And they haven't been listening to those ideas.
I mean, that's not what the problem is. The problem isn't ideas. The problem has been commitment. And if he's going to come in this week and do some sort of bipartisan rallying cry, I think that it's going to be very interesting to see the response, because it is an election year, and the idea of bipartisanship around this issue is going to be
Julie,
tough.
Expand on what you said. What do you think the president's heart is as you watched him this week? Because he did sort of balance going through the neighborhood as much as presidents can with all their Secret Service people and retinue, and appeared to be concerned. On the other hand, he talked to the police, and he talked to the U.S. Army, and he talked to the firefighters, and clearly wanted to praise them.
Well, it's almost as if he was bringing the sort of cloak of Desert Storm, commander-in-chief, and coming back, though, domestic policy-wise, and bringing it to Los Angeles. The problem is many of these people in these neighborhoods, the Latino people, the black people, the Asian people, the white people, want law and order. They can't get law and order in their own communities. And see, the problem, it seems to me, is that President Bush sees a dichotomy here. He can only speak to the police, or he can only speak to the black churches, or he can only go to Koreatown. He does not realize that all these constituents also want law and order. In some sense, it's the most lawless in their communities right now, and the White House hasn't figured out how to bring both of those two issues together. And I think that's where we need to go. And it's not just about civil rights groups on the one side and law and order on the other side, meaning the police.
Talk about communities that are in desperate need of law and order. And look what happened when the police abandoned them.
Well, George, and does anyone here believe that we're really going to have a massive spending program, money that's going to be voted?
A, we don't have the money. We can borrow it the way we borrow 20 cents of every dollar we spend in this country. We could borrow it, but I disagree with what Cokie said. Cokie, if I heard you right, you said we have the ideas, it's the commitment we lack. We don't have the ideas. I don't think anyone has. Well, Jack has a lot of interesting ideas for ameliorating the worst problems of the inner city.
Jack Kemp.
But yes, but revitalizing the inner cities. We may now be evolving the first great civilization in history in which the central cities will be important, not as centers of cultural and commercial vitality, but as burdens. It's tragic, it's wasteful, but it may be happening.
But you can't just abandon them. You can't do that. It's economically insane, aside from any moral questions. I mean, we know that by the end of this century that the majority of the workforce is minority and immigrant. And we cannot have people growing up without any education, without any training, without the rest of it. It just can't be done.
Let me ask a question and move us along to an area that's your expertise, Julie. As the Supreme Court this past week, by a 5-4 decision, further limited habeas corpus use from the standpoint of state courts having cases reviewed by the federal courts. Right. If I have it correct, what the Supreme Court said was that just because lawyers may have erred or not have presented the kind of defense that we would all like to see, that's not enough reason to allow, let's say, a condemned man to have his case or her case reviewed by the federal court. What's going to be the effect of this?
Well, what you see is the Supreme Court moving increasingly to narrow the ability of prisoners to come back into federal courts through the process called habeas corpus and get a further review of their cases, as particularly in capital cases. I think that the court has felt that there's been an entirely too much abuses in this area. But as you and I know, we've both been working on a story the past 2 weeks involving a prison inmate in Virginia who's now raising the claim of perhaps innocence.
Now that's Roger Coleman, who's set to die on May 20th in the electric chair.
He has an electrocution date set for May 20th, an hour before midnight that night. But the question is, what if he has claims of actual innocence that were not known before when he was convicted?
Well, doesn't the court still allow that? That's the one exception.
It is an exception, but again, it's very difficult to get into federal courts with this because the courts, federal in particular, don't see themselves as reviewing facts. They're not fact finders. That's the jury's role.
To me, what was interesting about that decision is the role of Congress versus the courts. For many, many years, conservatives have said that the courts should not be making the laws, the Congress should be making the laws. This was a law the Congress made and said that habeas corpus should be given under these circumstances. And the bill has come up over and over again trying to make it tighter, and Congress has not passed that piece of legislation. And the Supreme Court has decided to make the law in the face of what Congress has decided.
George?
What you have here is the will of the community in this country, like it or not, it's another question, is for capital punishment. We're imposing about 200 death sentences a year. The court, the highest court, is convinced, their conviction no doubt aggravated by the experience recently in the California execution, that the process has been abused by extremists, including some in judicial robes, making the process dilatory, using any recourse to frustrate the will of the community, which is to conduct executions. Now, whether or not this is a wise measure remains to be seen, but what is clearly the case is that the will of the community is not to have an average, what is it now, 10 years now?
10 to 14 years
10 to 14 years between sentencing and execution.
But you have always argued that the will of the community should be played out at the legislative level, that this is where people should have the political arguments, not in the court. What do we got now? Have a new activist court making these decisions.
Clearly the will of the community here is being expressed in contradictory ways here. The will of the community is expressed through the bill you cite, but also through the laws and the juries and the courts that are sentencing people to death that are not being...
Well, I don't think the will of the community, of course, is to execute an innocent person. And I may be the last person to also think the will of the community is to not execute a person who has been brought to that point wrongfully from the standpoint of evidence, from the standpoint, I still like the exclusatory rule.
No one's arguing. No one's
Well, I think that there's been a disconnect here. Obviously, the will of the people is, in this country right now, for capital punishment. But I think, as we saw in the King case, there is sometimes a large gulf between what juries see and what actually happened.
All right. Julie, you just had the last word. Thanks for joining us. And I'll be back with a final word in just a moment.
This is the hand that turned on the light, that lit up the desk where the idea was born for a quieter jet engine that flew the technician who works at the power plant, which produces its energy far more efficiently as it lights up the city and powers the hospital with its life-saving images, where Sam was found healthy, in time for the game, held under the lights and broadcast to millions by a satellite system, designed with precision and shipped by powerful locomotives that passed by a factory, that helped build a car with advanced thermoplastics, that sits in the drive at the home of Patricia, who went to the fridge and got a drink for her dad, who works in the room where he turns out the light as he puts his young daughter to bed.
Every day, GE technology touches the lives of just about everybody.
What traits do you look for in a financial firm? A herd mentality? Unsteadiness? Complacency?
Or do you look for strength, stability, knowledge of the world? What traits do you look for?
That's our program for this Sunday, although we will surely revisit the problems of the cities again. David Brinkley will be back next week. And tonight, Forrest Sawyer will have a complete update on today's top news stories, including the latest on the mine disaster in Nova Scotia. Ray Gandolf will be along on sports on ABC's World News Sunday. I'm Sam Donaldson. For all of us here at This Week with David Brinkley. Until next week, thank you and have a good day.
This Week with David Brinkley, brought to you by GE. From plastics to financial services, we bring good things to life. And by Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future. Transcript, send $5 to This Week with David Brinkley, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203.
This Week with David Brinkley is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
Today, division leaders collide as the San Antonio Riders tackle the Barcelona Dragons, or the Knights take on the Ohio Glory. Then top IndyCar drivers burn up the Brickyard as the Indianapolis 500 time trials continue, plus the second test in the International Race of Champions. It's all today on ABC Sports.
Alexander's Photo Center is more than just a camera store. Of course, we have new and pre-owned camera equipment, film, photo finishing and accessories, camera repairs, passports, and friendly help. But also you'll find darkroom accessories and supplies, the best custom black and white lab in town, professional commercial photography in studio or on location, plus rental equipment, rental darkroom, and studio for amateurs or pros. Come in and let us help you at Alexander's Photo Center and Commercial Photography, where we offer you more.
Iowa's largest mattress retailer has just opened a factory outlet store in the Westport Home Center in Des Moines. At Levitt Mattress, we handcraft the finest quality luxury mattress and box springs available anywhere. Since 1946, time-honored Iowa craftsmen have combined state-of-the-art technology with age-old manufacturing methods. During our 46th anniversary promotion, we've reduced prices on selected mattresses. Remember, when you compare specifications, you will always save 30% off furniture store sale prices.
Is TV too sexy? Starting Monday on Channel 5 News.
Hi, I'm Bob Vila.